So with this version of what we've seen, this is just the beginning of a much bigger idea and project. Can you share with us what is in your mind about what you want this to become?
Sure. So we wanted to bring the Pulpit Prelude to this film festival because it itself is a beautiful short film, but a teaser for the feature film that we're planning to make. And it's a thriller about a progressive pastor that preaches in a rural Midwestern town and starts getting death threats for the message of inclusion that she's preaching. And it's about her trying to fight to regain her pulpit and fight to stop the terrorists at the same time. And it's a really important story about advocacy and about protecting our sanctuary communities, our marginalized communities, and stopping all of the rampant violence that is entering churches, mosques, synagogues across America.
How important is it that you're doing this right now for the reasons you're saying that this needs to be seen now? I think it was very emotional, especially the way you end it with the reveal. This is very powerful material that people need to see now.
Yeah. I mean, as a filmmaker, I am only motivated by the ultra immediate. And this story, much like the last film we worked on together, is very, very much about what we think the world needs to see and have discussed now. There's church violence happening all the time. There's mosque violence. There's gun violence running rampant. And generally speaking, a lot of the motivations behind the violence is prejudice-based, and we wanted to tell a story that tackles that and encourages people to advocate for one another instead of denigrate. So
I'd love to ask Christian about your perspective of someone who knows this type of environment quite well.
Sure.
And coming from that, where I'm standing, to the people, how important is that perspective and his vision?
So you have to tell him you're a reverend in addition to...
I can do that. I am ordained as a minister and have worked in the church for almost 10 years, which is wild to me. But I do think that the importance of this film is that is manifold. There are a lot of ordained clergy and folks from a variety of traditions that Tosin named that are doing this work very urgently, very sincerely, and very faithfully. And so I think for me, as someone who's involved in advocacy and activism in faith communities, the more that we can tell that story and see that is happening, that creates a counter narrative to how a lot of people experience religiosity in the United States. And I would say globally too. I mean, this story speaks to that. And so I think as someone who works in faith communities, it is absolutely critical to understand and recognize that there is a strong voice for those types of advocacy moments, and that communities are building around those. But I also think the beauty of the nuance of this story is that there's also a lot of harm that faith communities have propagated, particularly white Christianity. And so it holds sort of a lens to Christian communities and says, hey, like there's some accountability for what's been happening and the type of rhetoric and the type of theology that is, I would call toxic and not true to the gospel. And so I think you sort of get this moment where you're seeing both. And I don't know how, as a reverend, like that's so important to recognize where we have been as church, but also to see the people that are trying to push hard against that and to provide a different way of seeing the world. And so I can't imagine a more important thing to be thinking about right now at this moment.
Yeah.
To speak to what she was just talking about, Tosin, about preaching hatred, from a leadership perspective, your character and the other FBI characters in the movie treat this ordained minister a certain way.
Yeah.
I think very much screaming to what you're saying of their viewpoint of what they consider bad preaching.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily what we get to see and maybe what we'll see in the future movie of who this preacher is, but can you talk to us about that perception that's out there, that there are, I mean, we're in Kansas, I'm from Texas, we have a lot of preachers that get in trouble for the things they say.
Yeah.
How important is it to look at what they say and hear what they say, whether it's horrible or not? We need to know what's going on because they're preaching to a big group of people. How important is that a part of this film?
Well, to address the first thing you said, it's interesting casting myself as, kind of an antagonist to our main pastor character in the film. But the reason for it is, we wanted to address the issue of victimhood and lack of advocacy for victims in our culture. How often law enforcement and our legal systems fail victims who take the courageous stand to come forward or to be advocates of things that can get them in trouble, like an inclusive message in a politically divided or conservative town. So we needed that opposition to her beliefs to challenge her, to hold the protagonist herself to her own standard of accountability, to see if she could rise up against this opposition and overcome it. But also, to speak to the other thing you said, this is a really, really important discussion topic, because at the end of the day, you never want to make a film that is didactic or overly controlling in it telling you to believe what we say or agree with exactly what we're trying to communicate. Instead, you want to make a film that presents ideas to be considered, presents implications and cause and effect, and lets you decide what path you want to follow. But ultimately, it's important to us to be the type of movie that isn't like browbeating, saying this is a Christian movie and we're trying to convert you, but instead is just saying, consider the way you walk through this world, and can you walk through it with more love and less judgment? And I think that would be the overall takeaway of our goal. And I just really think it's important that we help nudge religion a little less, a little more towards the interpretation and towards the acceptance, and a little further away from, here are some hard rules you should follow in order to be a part of this very exclusionary cultural institution. That was a long-winded answer, but I want you to do a better, shorter one.
I want to jump in. I think, too, what I appreciate about this story is that it's a conversation that's not just happening in congregations. I mean, religious communities reflect culture. And so I think, when I think about this kind of film and what it's doing, it's a critique of culture, but it's also providing sort of a window. This is the particular window that we're looking at to see and grapple with things like white supremacy, women in leadership, to think about what it means to be in activism and in our community and today, and how important and vital that is. So it is happening in a certain space, but I think it's really holding up a mirror to the larger cultural context, and I don't want that to be lost. I think that's the power of this story.
I've got a question for Chris about to capture that emotion. I was amazed in the film the level choices of height that you guys shot at, especially the conversations between her and the differing FBI agents and the way they handle the conversation. Can you talk a bit about filming those combative moments? I almost feel like this could be a play because of the way you guys shot it. I don't know if there's background in theater, but there felt like something where you guys could recreate this in many different forms. Can y'all talk about the way you shot it in that sense, that it is something that can translate outside of just a filmatic version?
Yeah, we were really intentional with kind of camera placement, giving people power angles, having the audience look down on certain people. As kind of the story progresses, we want to kind of be with our main character and kind of feeling everything that she's going through. So we were real intentional with where we put the camera, how we put the camera. Then obviously, Tosin, a massive background in theater, and I think that shows. And I got started in theater as well, in high school, and so I think some of that came through. But yeah.
What was that shot that we?
You're talking to this.
What was the shot that we called? Was it the social network shot? What was?
Gosh, yeah.
What was the angle that I always say? I want that.
It's like the forehead looking. Yeah, there's this one shot. I don't know if it's maybe Social Network. It's from some film, but yeah, there's definitely this one shot we're just always coming back to. And working with Tosin was really creative because you spend a lot of time in front of the camera. Right. So when we went to shot listing and kind of discussing the film, it was a lot of like, I'm the actor. This is where I want the camera. Which, you know, as cinematographer, usually most directors work with kind of come from the camera world or some other way. So I'm having to be in his seat, being in the scene with him to kind of understand where the camera is going, which is a different approach than I've ever had with the film, which was really exciting.
Tosin, which hat do you prefer to wear? Because you're good at both, so I'm just curious.
I think I prefer the ease of acting and the familiarity of it. I think I'm good at it, and it feels comfortable, and I can play well. But the gratification of directing and writing is unlike any other, especially when you're working with people as thoughtful and talented as these. You know, you make something that is so much more meaningful to you that nothing compares to that. So I guess I gave two answers instead of one.
As you should. You wear multiple hats in your responses.
I can't disrespect the other hat I'm wearing. I can't disrespect actor Tosin because I'm director Tosin. I'm happy.
I'm curious. One of the things I love at the very end of the film, I don't want to talk about the reveal. I think it's a very important scene. But the diversity of who she is speaking to is something I really loved in this film. Mm-hmm. The congregation is very much youthful, diverse, and I think different. And I think that speaks to what we get from her in the end, but speaks to the truth of, as much as you may be spewing hate, it is as much the people listening and how they respond and what they do with that information that leads to what you're trying to capture. Yeah. Was it important to give us a congregation that was so diverse, so young, and I think with their eyes open, rather than maybe in a bunch of old people listening to her? Would have been a different vibe. Yeah,
I'm going to let Christian speak on this, but I will just say, I think there is such a history of exclusion in religious environments, and there's such a present of that as well. And I know what it's like to walk into a church and feel uncomfortable or unwelcomed. And I know a lot of people, whether you're black, white, brown, whether you're abled or disabled, whether you're male, female, or anywhere else on the spectrum, there's so many ways in which you can feel invited or uninvited. And getting to tell a story that centers the people who sometimes often feel uninvited and unwelcome was a real perk of her ministry, Christian's real life ministry, and the ministry of the character, because it was an opportunity to centralize the marginalized in an environment where they often are pushed into the extremity, and instead make their concerns and their needs and their fights for advocacy a central cause of what the church is even doing, and then also a central cause of the conflict in the story.
I think you did a really good job answering that. I don't know if I can. I do think there is we're in this moment, which I don't know if it is new, but it is certainly a moment where we're seeing major changes in, I'm going to speak to American Christianity, and particularly in the white community. And there is this sort of power struggle between older congregations, older not necessarily meaning the age of the building, but the age of folks attending, and younger folks who really care about social justice and see that as a part of their faith convictions. And so I think there's been a lot of theological choices that we've discussed, like what are we trying to reflect? And so I think having a younger congregation is sort of speaking to that moment and this vision that's not just about the film, it's happening in congregations. And so it's a very intentional theological choice, and I think you captured it really well.
It's a good team. We did it together.
how excited were you to get into Tallgrass? What's it mean to be able to show this film to this community? I feel like New York and LA will look at this different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The South and the Midwest will look at it very differently, and maybe we'll learn something from it. How important is it to show it here in Wichita?
I mean, I'll just go first. I think we all have answers to that. But I just, first and foremost, the story was born out of here. We're Kansas filmmakers, and we may have moved to different places. I live in LA now, but the stories I'm always inspired to tell are of home and about the things that I saw experienced at home or want to address at home, and to bring the story back home, especially to Tallgrass, especially a city that I used to come to as a child. I used to come to Wichita back when I was little and lived in Greensburg, Kansas. This was the weekend vacation we would take. And so, it's very nostalgic, and it means a lot to be back at Tallgrass, and this time with one of our own films. So, yeah.
I am so excited to be here, and I think it's because our team is mostly made up of Kansans in some capacity, and I think that's so unique and special to be able to be sort of with the hometown audience. So that for me just makes it all the more sweet. But I also think what you described, like this is an audience that will see the nuance and have lived it in a different way, and I think that is so important to our mission of the film, and so I'm thrilled to death to be here, to be frank.
Yeah, I think it's an honor, being that it's a Kansas story, seeing it received so well here. I mean, it's a huge honor. I think this is my first film I've actually had in Tallgrass, so I'm just really excited to be here. And I'm just on cloud nine. This is great.
So I'm going to try and...
I think so. I had one other, I think. But this is the first time I'm actually here at Tallgrass, though.
Yeah,
so,
physically. But I think we also had on site.
Did we?
I think we've had a couple films here, I think. At least
maybe.
We've had a couple films here, and we're glad to be back.
So I'll have a fun question. Jayhawk, right?
What? No.
What did you go to?
Full Sail?
Full Sail. Is one of y'all a Wildcat?
So that's a great question, and this is a very nuanced. So I work at Kansas State. I'm not
the Wildcats.
Yeah, but I went to undergrad at KU at the University of Kansas. We actually met at KU. So
we're Jayhawks, but she's also a Wildcat.
It's very nuanced.
We don't want to cause any fights here.
Full Sail, is that in Orlando?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Winter Park, Florida.
Yeah. It's good.
But also,
no football program or basketball program.
No, it's a film.
but also you're a Kansan and a Chicagoan, so you could tell them that part too.
I'm also a Kansan and a Chicagoan.
You're in Kansas City right now.
Yeah, so I live in Kansas City and grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. So Midwest at heart, and spent most of my time here.
Wait, you didn't do any schooling here? I thought you did.
No.
I'm so confused.
I love that y'all two don't know each other when y'all two should know each other.
I thought at some point you did.
I'm the one holding the mic and not talking.
But no, I was just having fun with that. I'd love to close out by just... is there anything you can share with us about what's coming, what we can anticipate, and where this story goes? Because you got me hooked. I'm ready to see what's next.
Take it.
What's coming? How do I say it?
That you can reveal, obviously.
No spoilers.
Yeah. The beauty of the short film is that it really kind of teases a lot of big themes that we're going to get to dive deeper into in the feature. And I mean, you could see it. This is a woman against the protagonist is a pastor who is against great odds. She's got threats from terrorists she's dealing with in her personal life, at her church. She's got a little bit of conflict going on within some of the missionaries and the activists in the body of her church, and she's got doubt all around her from FBI agents to fellow pastors at the church. So she's got a lot to contend with, but we want our hero to win, and the odds are stacked. So that's all I can say. It's a suspense drama. It's a thriller. I can't give it all away. You got to stay tuned. Follow us on the pulpitfilm.com and find out more.
Also, we would love for folks to consider donating to our feature film.
yeah.
And we're looking for folks to invest too, to join the team, either as a producer or a whole variety of things. So there are ways for folks to maybe get to see a little bit more before the feature film comes out.
So all you Jayhawks, Wildcats, Full Sailors, I don't know what you like to call them, and anyone else that loves it, thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure to watch the film. It's been a pleasure getting to know you guys, and I can't wait to see more.
We're honored to be here, and we're so grateful for this interview. And for those of you who can't see it at home, he gave the whole interview from behind a pulpit podium, so it's like we were in church.
It was pretty great.
Thanks for having us.